Well, hello there again. Welcome back to the channel. I'm going to do some pricking out, and I thought you might like to come along because some people are confused as to what pricking out means, and it might be helpful for you when you're bringing on seedlings. If you're new to growing flowers or veg from seed, we've got some pricking out to do. And while I'm here, I'm going to talk about pinching out, compost, why we should use peat-free versus traditional, kind of 20th century peat-based compost. We'll look at and some top tips for using peat-based compost to get the most out of it. I've got loads of seedlings here. I've just taken off the fleece which was flung over them. I should have done a dramatic whoosh kind of thing for the beginning of the clip. But we had a forecast last night of -1 and it's been quite warm. So the night before the forecast was sort of 8, 9 and tonight it's back up to 7. And I don't want to shock my seedlings. So I fling a bit of fleece over them on cold nights. Now we're mid-March. Now, if you're new to the channel, please do subscribe, press the bell icon, and we'll tell you when we've got more clips coming up. If any of the tips and tricks are useful along the way, you can always buy me a coffee, or better still, join my YouTube club. We're now up to 250 members, get me, since the beginning of January, and it's great fun. Anyway, have a look at the club, it's a separate thing. So quickly, before I go any further, I'm going to talk about peat-free compost for a minute. I'm just going to uncover everybody. They were all covered up last night because of this frost. We did have a nasty little nippy frost. And so I'm glad I covered them all up. We also had a smashed pane of glass in the greenhouse, which meant that I had emergency moving of the dahlias from the hotbeds in the greenhouse. To save them from the frost, I had to bring them in here, and they have been wrapped up tight in fleece, and I've left the fleece on them. I just want to keep them a little bit warm. I'm trying to get them to start sending up little shoots so I can start taking cuttings. So they're off the hotbed, and the greenhouse suddenly, it's been in the same place for about 10 years and it's just sort of sunk into itself and it needs a refurb. The thing about flower farming is you think, oh look, there I am, I'm on it, I'm kind of okay, I'm all there, and then the greenhouse falls over or the lid of the polytunnel flies off or something happens all the time. Anyway, let's talk about peat-free compost. It is not sustainable to use peat-based compost. Peat-based compost is made with peat, which is cut from peat bogs. And peat bogs are amazing historical sequesters of carbon. And if you dig up a peat bog, you release that carbon back into the environment, the atmosphere, by digging it up and using it up. But also, that carbon sequestration has been stolen out of the ground. We can't keep digging up peat bogs. Sooner or later we'll run out of peat bogs. So don't use peat-based compost. And I appreciate sometimes people say, oh, but peat-based compost is so much better than anything that's not made with peat. Well, I would argue, I'm not sure how much better it is. I don't have an enormous experience. I'm 56. And I took up gardening when I was about 40, just before I was 40. And I've never really used peat-based compost because quite early on I read about how it was unsustainable to use a peat-based compost, and so I never really used a peat-based compost. I remember the smell from when I was growing up in my mother's greenhouse, and it is lovely. It's very peaty smell. Everything I have here has been grown in a peat-free compost called Silver Grow, which is made by Melcourt. They do not pay me to talk about this. And there are lots of different peat-free composts around, which you can find and use, and they're all fine. Here are tomato seedlings in Silver Grow, scented pelargonium cuttings in Silver Grow. They're happy, everything's fine in it. The thing that you sometimes find with a peat-free compost, and it is often because there's a certain amount of coir in the mix, so sometimes you find that the surface of the compost sort of dries off into a kind of like a very, very thin, solid layer. And that's why I'm going to be pricking out today. So here we have a tray of Ami Major's seedlings. And I'm going to prick them out back into the tray that they're in. This tray is nice and heavy. This is a great way to tell whether your seedlings need watering, is to lift up the tray. And if it's nice and heavy, it doesn't need watering. It's heavy, like it's full of water. If I were worried, I would stick my finger into the compost where there's a gap, and you can see it's nice and dark in there, so it doesn't need watering. But what happens sometimes is that the surface, and I'll show you here, these are snapdragons, variety called apple blossom, that I pricked out the other day, and you can see how the surface of the compost is slightly drier, and you can see where it's slightly damper underneath. Sometimes you'll pick up you'll look at your tray of seedlings if they're in peat-free compost, and you'll think they look very dry. You'll water the top, and sometimes the water just sort of sits on the surface and doesn't soak in so well. So what I do with a peat-free compost, no matter where I get it from, I will lift up my tray of seedlings before watering it, just to check it's heavy or light. If it's light, I'll water. If it's heavy, I won't. But also I tend to water from underneath. So I will I haven't got any spare trays here. Annoying. But I will put this tray into another tray without, you can see this tray's got holes in the bottom, that for drainage. So I will put this in another tray which doesn't have holes in the bottom, and I will fill that tray with water so that this compost can absorb water from underneath. And I find that with a peat-free compost, that's a really good way to make sure that the seedlings absorb water nicely. It's like a sponge. Whereas if you pour on the top, sometimes it just sort of sits on the surface and it doesn't soak in terribly well. It's much better to get it going from underneath. So there's a top tip, if ever I heard one. And I'm now going to do some pricking out, so stick with me. I do appreciate this. Might be niche thrills, but I love a niche thrill, me. So these are done. I'll leave them to grow on a bit before I plant them out. So we're the 17th of March. No, we're not. We're the 15th of March. And those will be planted out in about a month. So they'll have a couple of weeks more in here in the tunnel till the end of March. And then I'll take them out, harden them off a bit for a week or 10 days, and then they get planted in the garden outside. If there is still frost forecast, again, I keep handy with my fleece to fling over them on a frosty night, but on, for most of the time, by then we should be all right. We are in zone 8 if you're looking at frost hardiness. I hate the zoning system because I feel it's a blunt hammer for a situation which is so very much dependent on the weather, particularly in the UK. I think in America maybe you can be much more certain about your last frost date, but here we have a spring that starts at some point in late February and finishes sort of early June. You just don't know. And we have an autumn that starts kind of mid-September and finishes some point in November, whereas some places in the world you have a spring that starts one day and finishes a fortnight later and you're into full summer. So we're much it's a slower process, which is why I find any concept of last frost dates or any kind of guarantees with gardening, don't like it. I feel it's unfair on the gardener. Right, I'm going to put my tomato seedlings elsewhere, and I'm going to show you a bit of pricking out with these Ami majors, and I might have to raise myself up a bit. Okay, give me a second. I'm going to set my studio elegantly with some upside down seed trays. So this is going to feel maybe a little bit odd to do, but I'm going to prick my Ami major seedlings out in the tray in which they've germinated. And the reason I'm going to do it is because I find that peat-free compost sometimes gets a little, it almost forms a little crust on the top. So by pricking out, what I'm doing is I'm slightly digging, it's as though I'm digging round the baby plant, and I'm just freeing it up a little bit to grow on. Plus, as you can see, I scattered this seed. I mean, Ami major seeds are very, very tiny. So I scattered a few seeds, not gently as far away as I could from each other, but some of them have come up right next door to each other. So by pricking them out, I'm going to give them all space. They'll all have their own individual space. And if I turn this round a little bit, then you'll be able to see. So these were sown on the 14th of February. It is a month and a day since I sowed them. They were sown onto very slightly warm beds in the greenhouse, which is now smashed to pieces because of the wind. So they had a tiny little bit of bottom heat, but nothing hot, just off freezing. And once they were germinated, I got them out of there, off the heat, and I've got them here in my polytunnel, but no heat here. And they've just been sitting here growing on. And so I'm going to prick them out like this. Now, you may think, why has she got her snips? Well, snips got a nice little sharp point. And so I find it very handy to be able to basically dig up my seedlings with the points of my snips. So here we have a nice big seedling. I'm going to do this so you can see clearly. Here is this. When a seed germinates, often you'll get a sort of germinating leaf. This pointy leaf is the germinating leaf. This shaggy leaf is a true leaf of the Ami majus. So and most umbellifers, which is anything with a lace cap, a flower with a lacy cap, most umbellifers, when they germinate, have a pair of sideways leaves like this one has, and then they will start developing whatever their other leaf is going to look like. So I'm going to only touch the leaf that's essentially going to die off, and I'm not going to have it, it's not going to affect by touching it. If I bruise it or break it or pull it off, it doesn't matter. So that's what I'm going to pick up my seedling with, and I'm going to dig using my snips. It's quite exciting. Well, I mean, you know. And look at that lovely root system. Very tidy. And I could, I'm going to move this around. So you've got some room. I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. I'm going to dig a little hole. And I haven't touched the stem. I haven't touched the root system. And I'm literally going to pop it back in. And plant it again. And by doing that, I've broken up the surface of the compost if it's got a little bit crunchy. And I've split my little seedling apart from any other seedlings it was too close to. So I'm going to carry on doing this, and I'll show you what the tray looks like when I've finished. But I don't think you want to watch me do the whole thing, because you may die of boredom. Okay, on we go. It's very satisfying. Look, you just sort of you can hoik a little clump up, and taking one at a time, pull them out by the roots and replant them at the other end of the tray. You can, if you have bigger plants or bigger seedlings, pot them on into individual pots. Here we have a cucumber. And the reason I've put the cucumber in a bigger pot is because the cucumber is not going to be planted into my small polytunnel until June. So I've given it really quite a lot of space to make quite a big plant before it gets planted. I don't want to pot it on again. But these ammi are only going to have another month before they go in the ground outside. So they don't need so much space to grow on. I'll show you another one. So here, this is a Cobia scandens, a cup and saucer plant. And again, I cannot plant this out until it's really absolutely beyond any threat of the last frost. So that's why it's got a bigger pot to grow into. These ammi will be fine because they only have another month before they're planted out. Do you see? So here you have I've actually made 2 trays of this ammi. I've got 60 seedlings. So I've pricked out into the original tray, and then the remainder I have popped into a fresh tray. And I'm just making sure they're all nice and firmly tucked in. And then I'm going to water them from underneath. So look, hello, there's me. I've got this tray of water. And then I'm just going to pop these 2 little trays of ammi majors in, and they can have half an hour or so to really soak up lots of water. Make sure that those roots haven't dried out while I do the next tray, and then I'll swap them over. Next up, ammi visnaga, and this is another umbellifer. And do you remember what I said about so this is the leaf that first shows when it germinates, and this is its first true leaf, and you can see how it's different. They both the ammi majors and the ammi visnaga, which are both umbellifers, start off with this pair of sort of sideways leaves, and then this is the leaf I'm going to avoid touching, she says, touching it, when I prick them out. So I'm going to prick this lot out next. And then if you missed my little, I did a short on snipping out sweet peas the other day. And so here is a little bit to go with this clip. What you want to do with a sweet pea is, see this one, it has one set of true leaves there, that's a pair, another set there, and then it's got this bud for the next lot. And this is quite challenging to do while holding a camera, I'm going to snip out the top. And the reason I do that is to encourage the sweet peas to bush out and give me more flowers. So have some fun pricking out all. Woo-hoo. I have plenty more to do. It's always fun to do. And weirdly, you prick seedlings out and about 5 minutes, they love it. They go, oh, thank you very much. And they honestly seem to double in size almost straight away. For example, let me show you those Ami Majors we were looking at earlier. They have been in a tray for 25 minutes. And look, they're in their water, finger for scale. Honestly, they look as though they've doubled in size. I mean, I may be persuading myself, but they love being pricked out. And just a final quick word about peat-based compost. We can't carry on using it. So even if you struggle with the kinds of peat-free compost that you can find, we have to learn how to use peat-free compost. So I hope the tips I've given you here are helpful. Try different varieties. They're not always brilliant. Be kind to the compost makers because they're having to produce vast amounts more peat-free than they have done historically. And so if occasionally a lot of it is not brilliant, or it's got bits of wood in it or some plastic or whatever, be kind to them, because the compost makers are having to gallop to keep up with demand. And, you know, their logistics have changed. The places where they have their factories or put everything together have changed. You know, imagine back in the day, they would have a peat bog with a rail end, plenty of space, and all they had to do was dig the peat bog up, mix the compost, put it in a bag and ship it around the country. The peat bog is out of bounds. Having their place where they make their peat-based compost is defunct, and so they're having to completely change everything. So be kind to the peat-free compost people. I use Dalefoot in Penrith, if you're in the UK, because they are restoring peat bogs as they go. Also, Penrith is very close to Mum and Dad, so every time I put any Dalefoot in my land here in Somerset, I feel as though I'm helping the land with a little bit of Cumbria. I should be making all my own compost, but I would have to make 16 tonnes. But if you're a member of the club, you'll know from the project that compost making is go here at Common Farm. And we probably won't make 16 tonnes, but we'll make plenty. If you can make your own compost, you're going to save yourself some money. But if you're buying compost, buy the best quality peat-free that you can. And good luck, and have a lovely season. Here comes summer.